Well, the recent fight over the fiscal cliff in Washington again highlighted the deep divisions politically that we have in this country and revived the debate about whether our system of government is broken and how we can fix it. Now, one Georgetown law professor says he knows the answer. Quote, "Give up on the Constitution at the heart of our democracy." A document that this professor says is not only dated, but perhaps even downright evil. Mark Seidman is a Georgetown Law School professor and author of the forthcoming book on constitutional disobedience. Professor, thanks for being here.
Megyn, it's just a pleasure. And I do want to say, my guess is that you and a lot of your viewers don't agree with what I have to say. So I think it just speaks very well of you that you're willing to give me the time to say what I think.
Oh, absolutely. We're happy to have you on. And I think the piece you wrote is actually very interesting and thought-provoking. It's received a lot of criticism as well, but I'd love to talk to you about it. So I want to tell our viewers, you have devoted your profession to educating law students about the Constitution, teaching constitutional law. And you say it sort of dawned on you late in your profession, why do we show such adherence to this arcane document? And do we really need to? First, tell us your theory.
Well, in some ways, it's really very simple. This is our country. We live in it. We have the right to have the kind of country that we want. I don't think most Americans would be happy with the French telling us what kind of government to have, or the British, or the United Nations, or the Russians, or some law professor. It's our country, and I'm not very happy with having a bunch of folks who've been dead for over 200 years. It's a very small group of people who were not even representative of the United States at the time they wrote, telling us what kind of country we have. We have a right to decide that for ourselves. Now, there are a lot of things they got right, and when they got them right, we ought to do them because they're right. But we ought not to do them just because they said to do them. We need to think about all of that now and what's best for Americans now, and not what was best for them in 1789.
But part of the beauty of the document is that it foresaw this need. And in Article 5 provided an amendment process by which folks like you and me and our viewers can go out there and say, you know what, we do think this thing is outdated, it needs to be updated, and let's amend it. Why isn't that good enough?
So actually, Megyn, I think that's one of the biggest problems with the document. Of all the constitutions in the world, the American Constitution is the most difficult to amend. It's only been amended 27 times, only 17 times if you don't count the Bill of Rights. It hasn't been amended recently at all.
Well, we have some good ones. Some of those amendments are pretty good. You got to admit that, Professor.
Right.
Bill of Rights, women's suffrage, civil rights amendments.
Absolutely. Some are terrific. But the fact of the matter is, as things stand now, it's almost impossible to amend the Constitution. If you have even a pretty small minority, they can block amendments, and that means that even if the vast majority of Americans are not happy with some aspect of the Constitution, they can't do anything to change it.
You seem to be arguing in your piece, and perhaps in your book as well, which I have not yet read, but that what we need is something that would be more akin to majority rule. That's problematic because, as you know, we have shifting political majorities in this country, and people worry, okay, so let's take something that many folks on the left like, the right to privacy, and many folks on the right don't believe that exists in the Constitution, but let's say it's in there, or let's say we're subject to majority rule. Then you've got a President Bush who comes in and says, I don't believe in that, there's no right to privacy, and we're not having any Roe versus Wade or protection of abortion rights. Then you got President Obama who comes in a few years later and completely reverses that. I mean, what of the rule of law? What of consistency?
So, first of all, I don't think I've said anything about majority rule either in my book or in the.
Well, how does it work if there's no Constitution?
So here's basically what I think. If civil liberties, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, if those are going to be secure in the long run, they cannot be secure if the American people are just told this is the way it's got to be, whether you like it or not, because some dead people a long time ago said so. The way it's going to be secure is by our defending it now and convincing our fellow Americans that these are rights that we ought to cherish. If we don't do that, then in the long run, they're not going to survive anyway. So let me just give you an example. I happen to be against most forms of gun control. Now, but if you ask me why I'm against it, it's not because of what the framers said 200 years ago. It's because I happen to agree, for the most part, with the NRA, what they say today about how it's just not likely to work and not likely to be worth the cost if it does work. Now, what happens if you turn that question into a question of constitutional obligation? Well, then the lawyers get hold of it, and the lawyers do with this kind of thing what lawyers do. So you end up with...
But what about, I mean, the document, the Constitution, I mean, and in so many ways it's a beautiful document, and it speaks to limited government, you know, to individual liberty, to sustaining the rule of law, and it was meant to constrain the government. And folks who love it believe in the absence of it, flawed though it may be, what would there be to constrain the government? The government's done a lot of bad things that the Constitution has said, no, that's not going to happen. I mean, even folks on the left were so happy when, you know, habeas corpus was suspended for Gitmo detainees, and the Supreme Court came in and said, you can't do that. Why? Because of the U.S. Constitution, free speech restrictions, which so many politicians have tried. And the Constitution was always there to say, you can't do it. This is a founding principle. What would be there to stop those government overreaches if not the Constitution?
That's really a terrific question. And so here's my answer. First of all, the Constitution is a beautiful document. There are wonderful things in it. The preamble is poetic. And by the way, you slightly misquoted me in your introduction. I did not say the Constitution was evil. I think there were some provisions in it that are evil.
You say our insistence on obedience to the Constitution with all of its archaic, idiosyncratic, and downright evil provisions.
Right.
Some provisions.
That's right. There are some provisions that I do think are evil, and I'm glad to go into those if you want to. But I agree with you that, by and large, the Constitution is a remarkable document. And we ought to, certainly the great principles of it, forming a more perfect union, limiting the government, those are things that ought to be followed, not because people thought about them 200 years ago, but because we now think that they are correct. And I'm not even saying that we shouldn't have, for example, a Supreme Court, which is a matter of political morality, would stop the government from overreaching. I do think that if we have a Supreme Court, they ought to be honest about what they're doing, so that when they decide cases like cases about gay rights or about affirmative action, they stop pretending that they're getting those outcomes somehow from the constitutional text, which is nonsense. But rather
that's something you hear from folks on the right who believe that as well. So you've got some common ground there.
This is not an argument about right or left. This is an argument about taking control of our own country and being honest about what we're doing.
I'll tell you what, Professor Seidman, it's interesting to listen to you. I wonder what Jefferson and Madison and Adams would think about this. I don't think they'd be too happy with you.
Well, Jefferson would be very happy. He said over and over again that he was against constitutional obligation.
And you write in your piece
Madison and Hamilton might be more of a problem.
He wasted a lot of his time, if that were the case. In any event, Professor, it's interesting talking to you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Megyn. It was a pleasure.
Good luck with the book.
Thanks.
Taking your thoughts on it. Follow me on Twitter @Megyn Kelly. Let me know what you think. Thought-provoking, right?